two people begin what most viewers call a GLP-1 medicine. One loses 20 kilograms, the other barely moves the scale. Same broad treatment family, completely different result. Today, we are investigating why Mounjaro and Semaglutide can appear life-changing for one person and deeply disappointing for another. And here is the first evidence payoff. In one of the largest semaglutide obesity trials, roughly 1 in 7 participants did not reach even 5% weight loss. But here is the reversal. A later Tirzepatide analysis found that most selected participants who looked like slow responders early in treatment eventually crossed that threshold. So, not working may depend on what you measure, when you measure it, and what happened during the treatment journey. And some of the explanations circulating online are far more confident than the human evidence. I'm Sherif Elgendy, and welcome to Peptide IQ, where we investigate peptide and GLP-1 claims through human clinical evidence, regulatory facts, and product quality science. Before we examine why results vary, we need to untangle the names. Mounjaro contains Tirzepatide. Tirzepatide acts through both the GIP and GLP-1 receptors. Wegovy and Ozempic contains Semaglutide, which acts through the GLP-1 receptor. But the brand names do not carry identical authorized uses everywhere, and the answer changes depending on where you live. In the United States, this distinction is especially important. Mounjaro contains Tirzepatide, but Mounjaro is FDA approved for adults with type 2 diabetes. For chronic weight management, the US Tirzepatide brand is Zepbound. Zepbound also has an approved indication for moderate to severe obstructive sleep apnea in adults with obesity. Wegovy is the semaglutide brand used for weight management in eligible people in the United States, and it also has a cardiovascular risk reduction indication in defined adults. Ozempic is approved for type 2 diabetes, with additional cardiovascular and kidney risk indications in defined adults. It is not the US semaglutide weight management brand. Across the European Union, including major markets such as Germany, France, Italy, and Spain, the pattern is slightly different. Mounjaro is authorized for type 2 diabetes and in eligible adults for weight management. Wegovy is authorized for weight management, while Ozempic remains a type 2 diabetes brand. The United Kingdom follows the same basic weight management distinction: Wegovy for weight management, Ozempic for type 2 diabetes, and Mounjaro for both type 2 diabetes and weight management in eligible people. So when you hear a brand name online, ask 2 questions. What is the active medicine? And which country's regulatory label are we talking about? Because the molecule may be the same. The brand and the authorized use may not be. This video is for education only and is not medical advice. Do not start, stop, switch, restart, inject, combine, or purchase any medication or peptide based on online content. Speak with a qualified clinician about your own treatment response, side effects, blood glucose, nutrition, body composition changes, and safety risks. Now the question becomes more precise. When someone says, "My GLP-1 is not working," what exactly is not working? The scale? The appetite effect? Blood glucose control? Or the expectation created by someone else's transformation online? That distinction changes the entire investigation. Imagine walking into a hospital and being told that the average heart rate in the building is 75. That number may describe the group. It tells you almost nothing about the individual patient standing in front of you. Clinical trial averages work the same way. In step 1, the average weight reduction with semaglutide was nearly 15%. That result is real. But behind that single number were thousands of individual experiences. Some participants lost substantially more, some lost less. Some crossed the 5% threshold, but did not approach the headline average, and some did not cross that threshold at all. This is where social media quietly changes the question. A trial asks, what happened across the study population? The internet turns that into, this is what should happen to you. Those are not the same claim, and not working can describe several different situations. Your weight has barely changed. Your waist has changed more than your weight. Your appetite remains strong. Your weight initially fell and then plateaued. Or your HbA1c improved while your scale result remained modest. Each outcome asks a different clinical question. For weight management, NICE uses 5% weight loss as an important review threshold, but it is not a diagnosis made after a few discouraging weeks. For Tirzepatide, the review point is after 6 months on the highest tolerated treatment. For Semaglutide, NICE also uses a 6-month treatment review. The meaning is not below this line your receptors are broken. The meaning is the benefits, risks, treatment journey, and individual circumstances now require proper review. Peptide IQ mini verdict: define the outcome before diagnosing the failure, and never confuse an average with a guarantee. Now we reach one of the most surprising findings in this investigation. Researchers went back to the SURMOUNT-1 trial and separated Tirzepatide participants according to their early weight response. Those who had lost less than 5% by week 12 were placed into a group described as late responders. At that early checkpoint, these participants could easily have looked like treatment failures. Their trajectory was slower, their results sat below the threshold, and if they had compared themselves with the fastest transformations online, they might have concluded that nothing was happening. But the trial continued. By week 72, 90% of those selected late responders had reached at least 5% weight loss. That is an important finding, but it needs an equally important limitation. This was a post hoc analysis. That means researchers examined the existing trial data after the main study and created these response groups. The analysis did not include every person who had ever started Tirzepatide. It included participants who met defined measurement and treatment exposure requirements. They had received at least 3/4 of their assigned treatment, and they had weight measurements available at the required checkpoints. Week 12 also occurred while the original SURMOUNT-1 treatment program was still progressing through its planned escalation period. So this analysis is not a promise that every slow responder will eventually experience a major result. It does not tell an individual to wait indefinitely, and it does not replace a clinical review. What it does show is more careful and more useful. An early slow trajectory is not automatically the final trajectory. Some people need more time before the effect becomes clear. Some will remain limited responders, and some may have a treatment journey that no longer resembles the controlled trial. Peptide IQ mini verdict: early response is information. It is not a final sentence. But now the question changes. If trial participants can appear slow early and improve later, why are routine results often less impressive than the headline trials? Imagine 2 railway lines. The first is the headline path: scheduled visits, structured follow-up, planned treatment exposure, regular measurements, lifestyle guidance, and a research team actively trying to keep the trial running as designed. The second is the real-world path: side effects, prescription delays, cost, availability, missed appointments, changes in work, family, or health, and treatment ending earlier than planned. Only after the viewer understands those 2 paths do we need the formal terms: persistence, treatment exposure, and discontinuation. A large real-world study examined nearly 8,000 adults with overweight or obesity who began injectable semaglutide or tirzepatide. The average 1-year weight reduction across the cohort was lower than the headline phase 3 trials. Among participants who had not discontinued treatment, average weight reduction was about 12% after 1 year. Those who stopped earlier lost less on average. But this is where careful interpretation matters. This was an observational study. It cannot prove that staying on treatment alone caused the difference. People who continue treatment may differ from people who stop. They may tolerate the medication differently. They may have different access, different medical conditions, different treatment exposure, or different starting circumstances. The study also reported that most participants remained on lower maintenance doses than those often reached in the major trials. This does not mean real-world patients failed. It means the real-world journey was different. A medicine can have strong biological efficacy, while the outcome seen outside a trial is shaped by access, tolerability, persistence, and clinical follow-up. And this is where the internet often gets it wrong. It sees a modest result and immediately diagnoses bad discipline, broken biology, or a weak medication. But before blaming the person or the molecule, ask, did the real treatment journey ever resemble the trial? Peptide IQ mini verdict: trial efficacy describes what happened under designed conditions. Real-world effectiveness includes everything that happened along the way. There is another reason results vary. These medicines are not identical. Semaglutide activates the GLP-1 receptor. Tirzepatide activates both GIP and GLP-1 receptors, but mechanism is not proof of outcome. The stronger evidence comes from controlled human comparison. In SURMOUNT-5, adults with obesity but without type 2 diabetes were assigned to Tirzepatide or semaglutide. The average difference in weight reduction was approximately 6.5 percentage points in favor of Tirzepatide. That is a real head-to-head result. It is stronger evidence than comparing two unrelated trials, but it is still not an individual guarantee. The trial does not mean that every Tirzepatide user loses more than every Semaglutide user. Individual responses overlap. Some people respond strongly to Semaglutide, some respond less strongly to Tirzepatide, and the trial compared group averages, not both medicines inside the same individual. It was also an open-label trial funded by Eli Lilly. That does not invalidate the result. It is context the viewer deserves to see. Now change the population. Put one trial folder on the left, containing adults with obesity but without type 2 diabetes. Put another on the right, containing adults with obesity and type 2 diabetes. Across both the Semaglutide and Tirzepatide trial programs, participants with type 2 diabetes generally experienced lower average weight reduction. But this is not proof that diabetes simply blocks the medicine. These were different studies, involving different populations, background medicines, metabolic conditions, and designs. The fair interpretation is, type 2 diabetes is associated with a different average weight response pattern. It does not determine one person's destiny. Someone with diabetes should not compare their result casually with a headline from an obesity trial that excluded diabetes. That is not a fair personal benchmark. Which response pattern deserves the clearest follow-up investigation? A. A slow start. B. An early plateau. C. Blood glucose improves but weight barely changes. Or D. Side effects interrupt treatment. Comment A, B, C, or D below. Please do not include doses or personal medical details, because now we reach the explanation that sounds scientific, but may be far more certain than the data. Are some people's GLP-1 receptors simply broken? The phrase appears everywhere online. Your GLP-1 receptors are broken. It sounds specific, it sounds biological, and it conveniently turns a complicated outcome into one dramatic explanation. But does human evidence support it? There is a grain of real science underneath the exaggeration. People do carry genetic differences in the genes involved in these receptor pathways, and in April 2026, researchers published the largest genetic study so far examining reported weight loss and side effects after GLP-1 based treatment. They studied almost 28,000 people. The researchers identified a GLP-1R variant associated with slightly greater weight loss, but slightly is the key word. The estimated difference was less than 1 kilogram for each copy of the identified variant. That is scientifically interesting. It may help researchers build better prediction models in the future, but it cannot explain the enormous difference between someone losing 20 kilograms and someone losing 2. The study also has important limitations. Most participants were women, most were of European ancestry. The main treatment response data was self-reported. The survey included different brands, different treatment durations, compounded products, and varying reported doses. The researchers compared some self-reported data with electronic health records and found meaningful differences between them. The broader prediction model explained only part of the variation. Most of the variation in response remained unexplained. That is not failure. That is the honest boundary of the science. So, genetics has moved beyond laboratory theory. We now have early human evidence that receptor variation contributes something, but there is no validated consumer test that can tell most people exactly how much weight they will lose. And your receptors are broken remains an unsupported diagnosis. Peptide IQ verdict. Genetic influence? Preliminary. Broken receptor certainty? Misleading. The mechanism is real. The claim is the problem. There is another explanation that can become dangerous. If you are not nauseous, the medicine is not working. A noisy engine is not proof that the car is traveling faster. Side effects and therapeutic effects can occur together, but they are not the same measurement. Researchers examined whether gastrointestinal side effects explained the weight loss seen with semaglutide in the STEP program. They found that nausea, vomiting, and other gastrointestinal events explained less than 1 percentage point of the treatment-related weight loss difference. Meaningful weight loss occurred in participants with gastrointestinal symptoms and in participants without them. So the absence of nausea does not prove that treatment is failing. And severe nausea is not evidence of superior fat loss. Persistent, severe, or concerning symptoms belong in a medical conversation, not an online competition. Peptide IQ mini-verdict. Nausea may be a side effect. It is not a reliable home test of effectiveness. Now, return to the other popular home test, the bathroom scale. Weight is an important outcome, but it is not the only outcome these medicines can influence. In a real-world study of more than 4,000 adults with type 2 diabetes, Researchers examined both weight change and HbA1c. Only 14% met the study's thresholds for meaningful improvement in both outcomes after 6 months. A larger group improved in HbA1c without meeting the weight threshold. A smaller group improved in weight without meeting the HbA1c threshold, and another group met neither. But this study also needs context. It involved routine diabetes care. It included liraglutide, dulaglutide, and semaglutide. It was not an obesity-only comparison of Mounjaro and Wegovy. The fair conclusion is not scale weight does not matter. The fair conclusion is a person can respond more strongly on one clinical gauge than another. Weight, waist, appetite, and glucose are related, but they are not interchangeable. Peptide IQ mini verdict. One gauge can miss part of the story, but every gauge still needs honest interpretation. So, what should a viewer do with this information? Not change their medication from a YouTube video, not copy someone else's schedule, not buy another compound to unlock the response, and not diagnose themselves with broken receptors. Instead, use a more careful framework. First, define the outcome. Is the concern limited scale change, persistent hunger, an early plateau, blood glucose control, waist circumference, side effects, or a result that simply did not match an online transformation? Second, examine the timeline. A very early checkpoint does not answer the same question as a formal 6-month clinical review, but a slow early result also should not be ignored indefinitely. Timing changes interpretation. Third, examine the actual treatment journey. Were there interruptions? Was treatment stopped? Did side effects limit exposure? Did access change? Did the person remain in regular clinical follow-up? These questions explain context. They do not automatically explain causation. Fourth, match the evidence to the population. A trial in adults without diabetes is not a perfect forecast for someone with long-standing type 2 diabetes. A head-to-head obesity trial is not a personal switching guide. A post-hoc responder analysis is not a guarantee. And a genetic study based mainly on self-report is not a diagnostic test. Fifth, review the full balance of benefit and risk with the prescriber. That includes the outcome being targeted, the response achieved, side effects, other medical conditions, treatment access, and whether continuing treatment still makes sense for that individual. Notice what this framework does not contain: a universal diagnosis, a guaranteed timeline, a dose copied from a stranger, a peptide stack, or the assumption that limited weight loss equals weak character. A disappointing result can be emotionally difficult, especially when every social media feed appears filled with dramatic transformations. But response variation is not a moral verdict. It is a clinical question. Peptide IQ mini verdict. Review the evidence, review the journey, review the person. Do not self-diagnose from the headline. So why do Mounjaro, Wegovy, and Ozempic results vary? Here is the Peptide IQ verdict. Established. Weight loss response varies substantially between individuals, even inside controlled clinical trials. Important nuance. A slow early response does not automatically prove final non-response, but it also does not guarantee that a stronger response will eventually appear. Established. The medicine, the population, type 2 diabetes, treatment exposure, and the outcome being measured can all change the apparent result. Promising. Clinical characteristics may eventually improve prediction. Preliminary. Genetics now has genuine human evidence behind it, but current models cannot accurately forecast most individual outcomes. Misleading. Limited response does not automatically prove laziness. Broken receptors, insufficient nausea, counterfeit medication, or the need for an online peptide stack. A disappointing result deserves proper clinical review. Not shame, not an internet diagnosis, and not an improvised treatment change. In the next Peptide IQ investigation, we leave licensed GLP-1 medicines and enter a far murkier evidence problem. The FDA committee has been reviewing BPC 157, KPV, TB 500, and MOTS-C for pharmacy compounding. We will examine the official evidence, what the committee recommended, what that recommendation actually changes, and why a committee decision is not the same as proof that products sold online are effective or safe. If this investigation helped you understand why Mounjaro, Wegovy, and Ozempic results can vary, press like, subscribe to Peptide IQ, and share this video with someone trying to separate GLP-1 evidence from online hype. I'm Sherif Elgendy. Stay curious, question the marketing, always follow the evidence.